Hi, everyone. My name is Benji. We've got Jeremiah, Alex, and a very special guest, Dave Bossert, and we're going to watch Nightmare Before Christmas. So get Nightmare Before Christmas up. We're going to play it. We're not going to have the sound on so that we can not get flagged for doing something wrong. But please just, we're going to have some fun, and we're going to be here with Dave, who has been a guest on our podcast for a few times and has done some amazing books. If you haven't, his Kem Weber book is spectacular. The level of detail and the research that went into it. And I know Kem Weber isn't necessarily a household name, but I know you've seen his desks if you're a Disney fan, and 800 behind the scenes features for Disney movies. So please welcome Dave. How are you doing, Dave?
Hi, Benji. How are you?
Good.
It's great to see all you guys. It's so surreal what's been going on here, huh?
Yeah, and it's been a challenge, I think, for everyone, but at least we got classic Disney films to help the time go by. So what we're going to do is we're going to give a countdown in just a moment, and we're going to all press play. And we're going to talk about Nightmare Before Christmas. And the reason I asked Dave to participate is, in addition to just being a fantastic guest all the time, but Dave's actually working on a book about the making of Nightmare Before Christmas, which is pretty cool. So if everyone's ready, let me just check one thing.
In fact, Benji, I can share a sneak peek at the cover. And this is not a final cover, but it's still nonetheless a cover. I'm going to share that with you guys. If you could, can you see that?
Ooh, very nice.
With that red bar that says cover, not final. But that gives everybody a little sneak peek. This image isn't even up on Amazon.
Wow.
And I sent you, I think, Benji, you should have the link because people can actually pre-order the book on Amazon. They're not going to charge you until the book ships.
But I'm going to have someone on our support team share that link. So as soon as I get it, we'll put it in the comments, and then obviously, we'll share it as well. So
okay, cool.
So as soon as I get it, we'll make sure that happens. Why don't we go ahead and start the movie? So we'll give a countdown from 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and play.
Ooh, the castle logo, the modern one, just like original in 1993.
Well, the movie wasn't even Disney branded at first, right?
No, it wasn't. It was actually released under the Touchstone. The Touchstone logo, if people remember Touchstone at Disney, and part of the reason was at the time when the movie was made, I think the powers that be felt that the movie might be a little bit too scary, too frightful for their core audience, of kids that like Disney animation, and of course that's completely changed in a generation, because the kids that actually watch The Nightmare Before Christmas, they're grown up and having their own kids, and they're watching the movie with them, right? Jeremiah, I saw your hand go up.
I had this discussion just not too long ago while we were talking about prop culture, how I grew up and I remember seeing Nightmare in the theaters, and I was one of the few that loved it and was like, this is a great film. And everybody else was like, eh. And then it was probably about 5 to 6 years later that Hot Topic kind of made it a thing, and that's when it gained the cult status, really. And now it's everywhere.
Yeah, and it's interesting with this film because it did have a slow start out of the gate when it was first released, but I think part of that had to do with the fact that I don't think they were really sure how to market this movie initially. And, I shy away from calling it a cult film because it may have been a cult film, but today Nightmare Before Christmas is a mainstream holiday film, just like Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer or The Grinch Who Stole Christmas. To me, it's part of the holiday season to watch that movie, I think.
Yeah.
And Dave, wasn't that
Brian.
the inspiration? The original plan was to just make this a half-hour cartoon to be shown on TV.
You know, they were originally looking at it as possibly doing it as a Christmas special. They even talked about doing it in traditional hand-drawn 2D animation. And I'm really glad that Tim held out, and really he had a vision to make this stop motion. And really this movie, I think, revived stop motion and took it to another level where you could hold an audience for 90 minutes with stop motion. Up until that point, I think Will Vinton had done a Mark Twain claymation picture, but there really wasn't like a full-on animated stop motion feature that was done by a major studio at that point. And
I mean,
so
because
it was
I was born in '82, so I always associated stop motion with raisins.
yeah, the California raisins, you know, for my generation, I'm a little older than you, Benji. I always think of Gumby and Pokey, the old Gumby, or the Davy and Goliaths. If you've ever seen any of the Davy and Goliath claymations that were on Sunday mornings, and of course, you know,
Mr. Bill.
But also Ray Harryhausen, if you want to go way back, you know, before I was born, Ray Harryhausen was doing, you know, Jason and the Argonauts and dinosaurs, King Kong, and, you know, those kinds of things for live action pictures. So really Nightmare Before Christmas to me is the first time that a major studio releases a feature-length stop-motion film. And the beauty of this picture, I think, is the handmade quality of it. You know, when you watch this picture, you see the hand of the artist in there.
So, do you have any? I mean, we know obviously Tim Burton had a time at Disney before, you know, Nightmare Before Christmas, coming out of CalArts, sort of the legendary class at CalArts. But what's the backstory on like how this movie actually got made? I mean, you know, at some point someone has to pitch it, someone has to decide that this is gonna be put, especially stop motion, where, you know, it takes a long time. How did this all come together?
Well, you know, Tim was working he was working in animation at the studio, and he was actually doing some work with Glenn Keane as an in-betweener. And it became pretty evident, and I think Tim says this himself, that, you know, it just wasn't for him. You know, he wasn't very good at it. And they moved him into visual development. So he started doing some visual development work on The Black Cauldron. Around that time, and I'm compressing some of this, but around that time, he had written a couple of poems. One was called Vincent, and the other was The Nightmare Before Christmas, which was his riff on the Clement Clarke Moore poem, the Night Before Christmas. And so an executive, Tom Wilhite, was an executive at Disney Studios on the live action side, and really sort of took note of Tim, and gave him gave him a small budget to make Vincent into a short. So really Vincent, to me, is the short that launched Tim's directorial career, you know, in my mind anyway. I don't know how he feels about that, but I definitely think that, and I don't know, have you guys seen the Vincent short? I'm sure you have, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, the Vincent short to me is a wonderful little stop motion And by the way, it's not the first time Tim had done stop motion. He had always been interested in stop motion. When he was in high school, he was using an 8mm camera to make little stop motion films on a tabletop. And so, you know, he wanted to do Vincent as stop motion, and he brought together some very talented folks that he was working with at the studio, and they made this wonderful little short. And then, you know, the Nightmare Before Christmas poem, you know, he tried to sell that as a potentially a children's book. They talked about possibly doing it as a Christmas special, 2D, as I mentioned earlier. And it just wasn't really getting any traction. And he wound up doing another larger project for the Disney Channel. And then they funded his Frankenweenie short, the original black and white with Daniel Stern and Shelley Duvall. And by the way, I have a very fond memory of that film, because as Tim was making Frankenweenie on the Disney studio lot, I had started working at the Disney Studios in 1984. And, you know, at lunchtime, or if I took a break, I sometimes took a little loop around the studio lot just to stretch my legs. And I walked into one of the sound stages on the back lot, and there was the pet cemetery from Frankenweenie. It was the big, you know, hill, the gates, and all the pet gravestones and everything. It was really fabulous. I have a very wonderful memory of wandering around in that soundstage, looking at those sets. So, you know, he wound up doing that, and after he did that, as he puts it, it was the first of many times that Disney fired him. So, but he had this great calling card, because he had Vincent, and he had the Frankenweenie live action featurette, and he went off and wound up getting Pee-wee's Big Adventure over at Warner Brothers. And, you know, Pee Wee Herman, Paul Rubens, is a CalArts alum as well. So there's all these CalArts connections within the entertainment industry. But, you know, he went off, he did the Frankenweenie show, and then that was a big success, and he went right along, and in succession did a bunch of films, and then he wound up doing Batman, which was just this huge, if you remember, that Batman movie that Tim did was a huge success. And at that point, Tim was like the hottest director in Hollywood. You know, every studio wanted to work with him, and he still had this, you know, this feeling in him, inside, that he wanted to do something with Nightmare Before Christmas. So he had his manager or agent reach out to the studio, and the studio at that time was being run by Jeffrey Katzenberg, and he had the guy reach out and ask if they weren't going to do anything, like, did they still own it? Could he have it? Because he wanted to do something with it. And they hadn't done anything with that film, you know, with his artwork or anything for like 10 years. And all of a sudden it was like, yeah, we want to do this. We want to do it with you, you know. And it was their way of bringing him back into the fold at the studio. And really, I think they wanted to get back in the business with Tim Burton at that point, because he really was, you know, the hottest thing in town. And so they gave him a small budget to make, you know, Nightmare Before Christmas, with the idea that they were really going to get him to do some live action films for the studio. And so that's kind of how that all came about. And, you know, Tim realized, I think, early on that he wasn't going to be able to do Nightmare Before Christmas, actually direct it, because he was already in development with the second Batman movie. And so from there, it was pretty obvious that he was going to go to Henry Selick, because Henry was actually doing those California Raisins, and he was doing some other claymation commercials up in the Bay Area, and so that's how Henry came in as the director. And again, Henry was a Cal Arts alum, and you just started pulling these people together, and they set up shop up in San Francisco. And honestly, I think part of the secret to the success of Nightmare Before Christmas was the fact that there wasn't a lot of executive oversight on that movie. I mean, there was some, but there wasn't a lot. I think that it was being done in San Francisco. It was kind of outside the Burbank backyard. It was sort of Tim's pet project. The studio really had their sights set on doing some live action movies with Tim. And it was sort of, they would see the movie progress periodically, and they'd give some notes, and and that was that. And so I think that's one of the reasons why you had this small group of artists working in an old warehouse in San Francisco, making this movie. And this, look at the phenomenal success, more than 25 years on for this film. I'm not seeing what you guys are saying.
We're just right now we're seeing Jack's in the the forest with the different holiday trees. So,
Yeah.
So Alex, could you tell me a little bit about your story with Nightmare Before Christmas? Like, what was your exposure to it?
I think I was 8 when it came out. I remember really wanting to see it, and this was this the same year? I know it was the same year as Hocus Pocus. Was Muppet Christmas Carol this year too?
I couldn't tell you.
Luckily, I have the internet. I'll look it up.
My memory says it was like Hocus Pocus in the summer, Nightmare Before Christmas in the fall, and then Muppets Christmas Carol in the winter. So it was like this trifecta of amazing holiday films, all from Disney. I do remember
92.
It was 92, so it was the year prior. But I do remember kids at my school being afraid of it, like, talking about it during show and tell, because I had quite a few of the toys, and I didn't realize that the toys were worth a lot until I was a teenager and went to my first comic convention in Chicago, and some guy was selling used versions of the toys for like $50 each, and I was like, oh, these are worth something. But I had a lot of the toys that were made. I had the children's picture book of Tim Burton's original artwork and kind of his original treatment for it. And I was really into it. I remember I knew it was Disney, even though it said Touchstone, because of Roger Rabbit. Like, Roger Rabbit was my reasoning for understanding that as a kid that Touchstone still meant Disney. And when it came out on VHS too, it was like a black version of the white Disney clamshell case. They were the only studio using them in the early 90s. Everyone else was doing the paper sleeves, but Nightmare Before Christmas had that same shaped case as all the Disney classics, but it was a black box. I think it was the first time anyone had done that too, which was pretty cool. And I knew who Tim Burton was as well. As Dave mentioned, Batman, I was huge on that. Batman Returns is my favorite of the Batman films. I would watch Beetlejuice and Edward Scissorhands, but I was a little afraid of them. But like when I saw this, I instantly recognized some of the stylings from Beetlejuice. There's that big snake in the backyard, and the man with the snake hands, like they look just like that. So I think I was starting to get old enough to understand like one person's creative vision and all that. But I mean, I just love this. The whole marriage of Halloween and Christmas was so cool. And personally, like Dave mentioned, this is a part of the holiday season is watching this movie. I like to save Nightmare Before Christmas for Halloween night, because everybody else puts up Christmas on like November 1st. Some stores do it in August now, but it's become socially acceptable to start your Christmas decorating November 1st, and I feel like Nightmare Before Christmas is the perfect kickoff to that. wrapping up Halloween, starting the Christmas season.
I just want to share one comment. Shelley says that the second Batman movie is her favorite Batman movie. So
it's the best.
You know, I don't disagree with that. You know, I mean, when you look at what Tim did, he did Vincent in 82 and he did Frankenweenie in 84. And then he had Pee-wee's Big Adventure in 85, followed by Beetlejuice in 88, and then Batman in 89.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, he was on a roll.
And then he did Edward Scissorhands in 90 and Batman Returns in 92. I mean, it's just pretty amazing, you know. And again, you know, Pee-wee's Big Adventure was huge, and then Beetlejuice was even bigger. And then all of a sudden he's got Batman, which I think at that time was probably one of the highest grossing live action films, if I'm not mistaken. So, you know, it's amazing. And what's even more amazing is the number of Cal Arts folks, alumni that were involved in some of these productions. You know, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Rick Heinrichs, because Rick is a production designer who's worked with Tim on a lot of his movies, but he was also, he doesn't get the credit that I think he's due on Nightmare Before Christmas, because really he's responsible for being able to translate Tim's drawings into 3D. And I'm just gonna share one of Tim's, let me see how I could do this. I have this open and I'm gonna share this, and you guys tell me if you're seeing that.
Mm-hmm.
You
Yes.
see that? So there's one of Tim's original drawings from back in 81, 82, when he was, you know, he had written the Nightmare Before Christmas poem that merged, you know, essentially, you know, Halloween and Christmas together. And this was one of the drawings he had done. And I think, you know, that's such a flat two-dimensional drawing. And Rick was really adept at being able to take a drawing like this and then turning it into a three-dimensional puppet, you know, and still maintaining the beautiful sensitivity and sensibility of Tim's drawings, you know, and that to me, I think is, you know, just incredible to be able to do that. But also it was, you know, something that really brought Tim's vision to life, was being able to faithfully translate his drawings into those three-dimensional puppets.
Yeah.
You know, just to share my Nightmare Before Christmas story, which actually goes back to Roger Rabbit, as Alex was saying. I remember being a kid, a very small kid, and being so upset because I saw Touchstone, and I didn't know Touchstone equated with Disney, and seeing that mix of animation and live action, and being so mad at whoever Touchstone was because they were stealing Disney's thing, because I knew Disney had done it for eons. And I was like, who are these guys taking Disney's bit? But then obviously it wasn't I think we were at the grocery store. My dad's like, Disney owns Touchstone. And so when Nightmare came out, the branding of it confused me. I didn't see it in theaters, not just the timing didn't seem to work out, but I did get the soundtrack, and I remember taking the CD and learning all the songs by heart, which was really my entryway into the film. And then, you know, I see the movie, and then I find out what happens in between the songs.
Yeah, and you know, I'm glad you mentioned the songs, because to me that was a really instrumental part of the making of this movie. Because, you know, typically if you're going to do a live action film, or really, you know, at this point any kind of a film, you start out with a script, and Tim started out with a screenwriter who really was starting to write a script, but it just wasn't coming together for Tim. And so he kind of did this 180 degree and went in a different direction, and he went and collaborated with
Danny
Danny
Elfman.
Elfman, yeah, with Danny Elfman, who he had worked with for the first time on Pee-wee's Big Adventure. And I think everyone's aware at this point they've had such a huge collaboration over the last 30 years of filmmaking. And I'm going to share a picture with you guys. This is me with Danny, and you can see right behind us is the little Jack puppet as Santa Claus. So again, it's Rick Heinrich's translation of those drawings into that puppet. But Danny and I spent a number of hours together talking just about the music in Nightmare Before Christmas, because when Tim went to him, Tim would come and sit at Danny's place and he'd explain part of the movie. And Danny would go off and write a song. And then Tim would come back and listen to the song and say, yeah, that's great. Or, what about this or what about that? And then he would tell Danny some more of the story, and Danny would go off and write another song. And essentially it was like musical theater. It's like a operetta. They're telling this story through a series of songs. And I thought that was just such an amazing story to hear that from him, and to talk about the creative process of how he went about writing the songs. And basically the songs were written before there was a script, because then they brought on Caroline Thompson, the screenwriter, to then write a script that stitched those songs together. And that's how that came about. And while that was all going on, Henry was up in San Francisco building a production team, and they were doing test animations, and they were figuring out what the process was going to be. And so it's almost like a choreographed chaos, if you will, to be able to get these films done, because there's so many aspects of it that are overlapping, and they're bringing in so many different people.
That's amazing. They did the Nightmare Before Christmas at the Hollywood Bowl at least maybe twice.
I think
they've done it 3 times.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
It's amazing to see the passion around the film. Hey, Jeremiah, what's your nightmare story?
Mine was, I was a kid in Lancaster, California, and I was a huge Disney fan, and just like you guys, Roger Rabbit and Touchstone, and Splash was actually my first introduction to Touchstone, and then Roger Rabbit, and then Nightmare. And while I love Tim Burton, Batman is probably one of my #1 loves behind Disney. Really, the biggest draw for me was Danny Elfman. As a Southern California boy, Oingo Boingo was my life for most of my childhood. So him actually not just writing music, but actually the songs for it made me want to see it even more. And I mean, sadly, on the flip side, Nightmare Before Christmas was kind of the beginning of the end for Oingo Boingo, because he wanted to focus more on things as they talked about in the prop culture. Danny Elfman, some of the songs is Danny Elfman saying, I'm a little tired of Oingo Boingo. I want to be my own, and I want to escape. And he is Jack.
And I think it'd be remiss as a Laughing Place crew if we talk about this movie and not the sort of the culture that kind of sprung out of it, and also the life that Haunted Mansion Holiday has given this movie, which has been going on far more many years than I'd like to admit. But I think many ways it gave this, between this ABC Family and Freeform, I think it gave this movie a lot more exposure than it might have otherwise.
It definitely did. Dave, do you address any of that in your book, or is it just purely about the film itself?
Well, you know, what I'm talking about in the book is I'm telling the story about how the film came to be and all the various artists and technicians and production management people that came together to make this film. But then I also am talking about, you know, aspects like, you know, how did this movie become such a pop culture phenomenon? You know, and how, you know, how has this film just resonated from generation to generation? I mean, there's going to be a couple of pages showcasing people's tattoos. And I got to tell you, when I put a plea out, and I think, Benji, you guys helped me with this. I mean, I got flooded with so many photos of people's nightmare tattoos and some of them are just like an entire sleeve on the leg or on the arm with all of these nightmare characters. And also people, you know, the cosplay and people dressing, you know, decorating their homes at Christmas, all themed on Nightmare Before Christmas, or, you know, all of that kind of stuff. And then you've got the live concerts, and I've got something here I'm going to share with you, because this, I think I should be able to show you this. Here's the program notes. I wrote the program notes for the Hollywood Bowl, and,
Oh, wow.
and this is actually the cover. You know,
That's cool with the baton, right?
yeah, and so, you know, the first time they did this concert at the Hollywood Bowl, they had asked me a number of months in advance to write the program notes for it, which I happily did. And went to the show. I mean, it was just fantastic experience, you know. And again, it's about, you know, to me, it's this idea that you've got this wonderful property, and I think this is what Disney does so well, is that they'll take a film like Nightmare Before Christmas, and not only are they doing merchandise, but now, you know, they've got live concerts. They've got the overlay for the Haunted Mansion down at Disneyland. And why they're not doing it in Disney World, I don't know. But they should. Don't you think, Jeremiah?
I'm a little bit of a purist that I think that it's great to have it just in one coast.
Really?
So I have a reason to go home.
Okay. All right.
I mean, but they do it in Tokyo also, which is the exact same Haunted Mansion as the one here. So they could easily do it. But as somebody, when I was a cast member in 2001, when the first year of Haunted Mansion Holiday came about, and I can remember walking into that and just being blown away. And then the second year with the changes, and I don't know if Benji, you were going to aim towards this, but the story that I always heard was the first year was Disney Entertainment just said, hey, let's do something with a Haunted Mansion overlay. And they threw in the Nightmare Before Christmas, and it was such a success. The following year, Tim Burton and Danny Elfman both got involved and said, hang on, this is our baby, so let's redo it. And then they redid some of the, actually the entire score of the attraction was redone the second year, done by Danny Elfman.
And then
each year since.
In third year, they kind of did a mix match, which is what you have today.
Yeah.
You know, I just think though that kind of stuff to me is just so wonderful, you know, because, you know, as a fan of the movie, you're getting to experience it in different ways. You know, it's not just a movie anymore. It's, I don't know, it's a lifestyle. You know, it's just, it does sort of grow on you. And, you know, they keep coming out with some great merchandise. And I know that Tim spends a lot of, you know, time every year. You know, he approves all the stuff that they're doing merchandise wise. So you're getting some really neat stuff. They're not, you know, just slapping nightmare characters on a lunchbox. They're actually doing some
But
fun.
they did do that.
I know they did, but you know what I'm saying though. They are doing some really inventive merchandise, which I really like a lot. And here's another picture I'm going to share with you guys. and get this up here. Let's see. Can you see that one? That's me with Tim out in Malibu. This is I guess now probably almost 2 years ago when I sat down with him to talk about the book and just ask him some specific questions and essentially interview him for the book. And incredibly gracious, wonderful, very nice person. We had a lovely conversation, and it was terrific to get his sense and input on the picture itself. So.
I don't know if you had a chance to ask him about this, but what are his thoughts about the legacy of the film now? Now that it's really become, I mean, quite frankly, I think, has a bigger, it's left a bigger cultural landmark than, Beetlejuice or Edward Scissorhands at this point. I mean, back then it was a different story, but now it feels like this might, outside of Batman, might be his most enduring work.
I think that the Nightmare Before Christmas is an incredibly personal project for him. It has a lot of meaning to him. It reaches back for him to his childhood. His favorite holidays were always Halloween and Christmas. And so there's a very deep personal meaning for this particular project for him. It means a lot for him. And it was, in my view anyway, it's something that he put his heart into, and in a sense you almost feel like he is Jack Skellington in some sense, that he's Jack is a very relatable character. And by the way, when I was talking with Danny about all the music, Danny felt the same way. He really related to Jack Skellington as this, character that, didn't quite fit in, wasn't quite what he wanted to be, if that makes sense.
Well, and it's also kind of fitting knowing Tim's, Disney past and not really fitting in with the style that the studio was doing in animation. And this is a story about Jack trying to get a group of people who are as un-Christmas as possible on board with Christmas, which I think also reflects his personal experience at the time that he probably came up with the idea to begin with.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with you on that. And, I think that, when you watch this film, I think the reason why it's just continues to grow an audience year over year consistently, and has been for now, more than 25 years. I think part of it is that there's a lot of people out there that feel like they relate to Jack, that they feel like the odd man out, and and I think part of the theme of this movie for me is that it's okay to be yourself. It's okay to be who you are. And I think that's, something, again, that just resonates so well with audiences out there.
So as we're watching the film, Lock, Shock, and Barrel are about to head into Oogie's lair, who is one of the, partly because he's associated with Halloween, has become a very iconic Disney villain.
Yes. And by the way, one of the largest of all the puppets on that film. Oogie was primarily animated by the supervising animator on the film, Eric Layton. And Eric is not the tallest guy in the world, but when he was talking to me about working on Oogie, he said it was like you had to really grab onto the puppet and really move it moved the armature. It was almost a struggle to work with that puppet.
Hmm. Well, and all the bugs, I mean, it's jumping ahead a little bit, but all of the little bugs had to be individually animated and individually
Correct.
made as well.
Yeah.
Spoiler, Alex.
I hope this is no one's first time watching this movie.
This is not the way you should watch this movie the first time.
If you are, pause, finish it with sound, and then come back and watch us.
One of the things, Dave, that you talked about the culture and the following it's gained. What I think it was 2 years ago, Benji and I were at San Diego Comic-Con, and all of a sudden we get a tweet about a pop-up happening at this small museum a few blocks away from Comic-Con. And we both know the diehard fans, not only of Comic-Con, but of Nightmare Before Christmas. So we got up a few hours early and were one of the first in line. And we still waited probably about an hour and a half. And it was literally walking through 2 rooms. They had a few small displays and they gave us a toy when we walked out. So we go through, and when we got in line, there was maybe 10 to 15 people in front of us and a couple of people behind us. By the time we had actually made it into the gate, the line, you couldn't even see the end of it. It was wrapped around the building, and they were actually worrying about the capacity when we were leaving.
Yeah, that's when you start to see the fire marshal walking around with a scowl on his face, right?
Not to go off topic a little bit, and I know we were talking about why Nightmare Before Christmas, Haunted Mansion Holiday is not in Florida, but in completely unrelated news, Phil Holmes announced his retirement today.
Oh, wow.
Really?
Yeah, just as that, I guess just a couple hours ago. Just got that across the wire. So.
Wow. Breaking news.
And things change all over the place. Dave, do you have a favorite song from the film?
Gosh, it's probably got to be "This Is Christmas."
Mm.
You know, the when he gets back from Christmas Town.
Making Christmas.
What's that?
Making Christmas.
Yeah, Making Christmas.
It's a good one.
I don't know. I mean, I love the entire film. I've watched it so many times. I just absolutely love the movie. I've watched it in 4D down at the El Capitan. In Disney 4D. In fact, I was there last September with Don Hahn. Don Hahn and I did a little thing on stage before they screened the film. And a lot of times, when we go out and do these kinds of things where we're introducing something or talking about something, and then they run the film afterwards, a lot of times people, that are on stage, like when they're done, they just leave and go home. I had my family sitting out in the audience, and so when I got off stage, I just trotted down and sat in my seat, put my 3D glasses on, and we sat and watched the entire movie in the theater because I just love watching the film, and especially on a big screen. I mean, I have to tell you, I can't wait for theaters to reopen at some point when this crisis is over.
I forget if it was the first year or second year, but one year they did Haunted Mansion Holiday. They showed the movie at the Fantasyland Theater, and of no fault of the film, it was one of the most miserable experiences because those benches were not designed for a full-length feature. They were designed for a 40-minute show.
Oh, yeah.
But I was amazed at the appreciation. It's one thing to see the movie in a general audience kind of environment, but to see it with fans who just, they just are palpable. Even in that sort of, it was cold and tough, they didn't care. They enjoyed it so much. And it made me really appreciate the film a lot more than just, another Disney movie we're doing a screening of, we do it all the time, and it made me take an even more detailed look at, the legacy of the film and how people really fell in love with it.
Well, and I think, I agree with you on that. I mean, again, from my perspective, I look at this, having worked on so many animated films at Disney over the years. And I actually, by the way, I worked on Nightmare Before Christmas. The funniest thing was when Disney Editions, the publisher at Disney, one of the editors reached out to me and said, would you be interested in writing a book on Nightmare Before Christmas? And I said, aside from saying, sure, I'd love to, I said, I worked on the movie. They had no idea that I had worked on the film. I had a very, very tiny, small part of working on that movie, but I knew most of the players. Most of the people that were involved with it, a lot of them I had gone to school with, people like Joe Ranft and Kelly Asbury. And, I worked with folks like Jorn Klubin and, my gosh, so many different people on there. In fact, I'm going to show you of all the animators that worked on that picture, there was only one female animator.
Really?
And I want to show you this picture because I'm sure there's a lot of folks that are watching this, and a lot of women who are interested in filmmaking and stuff. But this is can you see this?
Yes.
Yeah, that's Angie Glocka. She was the only female animator on Nightmare Before Christmas. And you can see, look at what a mess it is around her with all kinds of lights and cameras and, all kinds of stuff. And then she's got the set is right behind her. You see the mayor on that pedestal, right?
Right.
And so doing stop motion animation, I asked her, I said, why do you think there aren't a lot of women doing stop motion animation back then? And she said, I think partly because it was such a physical thing and, you're using drills and power tools and things like that. And she said she grew up helping her father out in his shop. And so she was no stranger to power tools and stuff like that. And she liked getting her hands dirty and going in and doing things that were more mechanical. And I think it's important, and I talk about this in the book, that, all of these avenues within the arts are open to everybody. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter your gender. You can do this stuff if you want to do it. And I think, she's proof of that, being one of the key animators on Nightmare Before Christmas, but it's kind of a neat photo, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's neat to see, unlike when you would see behind the scenes of like Aladdin or something and you see someone drawing, to see the dimension and the actual physical place that this resided in is kind of cool. Somewhere between live action and animation.
One of the fun things that we're doing with the book is we've got a couple of pages that we're going to be putting in 3D images. So one of the animators who worked on the film actually was a 3D photography buff and had taken a whole bunch of 3D photographs on the sets. And I'll just share one of them with you. I don't want to give too much away here, but I think this is kind of fun because he had this whole cache of 3D images. Can you see that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Do I have a glasses around?
So what you're looking at here is an Anaglyph Image, and I actually have my 3D glasses here, so I'm looking at it in 3D. But that's what's known as an Anaglyph Image, and it's really the best way to show these in a book, I think. And you have to wear these red and blue glasses, but you get a really great sense of the 3D when you look at it like this.
So Dave, will the glasses and
Yeah, so the plan is that the 3D images, I'm not 100% sure if they're just going to be in the deluxe version of the book or not, but they are including the paper glasses with the book.
Mm.
So speaking of the book, I know we put the Amazon link in the comments, but when's it come out?
Your guess is as good as mine at this point. I think I feel like I've been talking with you guys about this book for like 3 years, because the book was actually supposed to come out June of 19. Then they said, well, we're shuffling our release schedule, because any publisher is releasing dozens. Some of these publishers are releasing hundreds of books a year, right? Mm-hmm. And so they said, we're juggling, we're not going to make it. And part of it had to do with the fact that the book is being laid out with Tim's people. Tim has a designer at Tim Burton Productions, and he likes to use his own designer. And so she's doing a terrific job, but she had to put the book aside because she had to do some Dumbo books before his Dumbo movie released, which came out last year. Was that?
Yeah, last year.
Yeah, it was early last year, right? So
19.
Yeah, so then they said, okay, well, it's not going to come out June of 19, it'll come out June of 20. So if you go to the Amazon link, it'll say June of 2020. Well, it's not coming out because I'm supposed to see, like, any day now, they're supposed to be sending me the finished layout of the book to review. So it's not coming out this June. They're saying it's coming out June of 21 now. So I hope it's June of 21. I don't know what to tell you.
For those that can't wait, you have some other books too, right? You have
thanks for mentioning that. You mentioned the Kem Weber book earlier. There's a soft paperback version of that, the soft cover version, coming out in September on the Kem Weber book, and it'll be a lower price point. And then we also have a 3D Disneyland book coming out. So this is kind of cool because there's nearly 100 photos that were, a big portion of them were taken between 1955, it was about a week after Disneyland opened, between 55 and 58, 59. And then there's a bunch of photos in there from 1980.
Oh, wow.
And it's a private collection. It's never been seen publicly before. And it's just, I think it's a stunning book, but what do I know? I only work on projects I really want to work on. So, I'm thrilled with it. I can't wait for it to get out into the world. And what's really neat is we've added a couple of photos of Walt Disney at Disneyland in 3D.
Oh, wow.
Nice.
So one of the pictures, you may have seen it before just as a regular photograph, but you've never seen it as a 3D photograph.
That's really cool.
And that will come with glasses, 3D glasses, So I'm really proud about that. And of course, we got the Claude Coates book coming out later next year. So there's a lot of projects in the hopper, and I'm just having a ball working on all of these things.
Can you talk a little bit about what your involvement was with animation on Nightmare Before Christmas?
Yes. So thanks for asking that, Alex, because it was interesting. The film was being done up in San Francisco, but there were some technical limitations. And at the time, I was working down at Walt Disney Animation Studios, and we were housed over in Glendale. This is before they built the new animation building with the sorcerer's hat on it that you could see off the freeway down here. Mm-hmm. So they needed some help initially with some wire removal, these wires and things to hold puppets. So they needed some help with that. I didn't really have anything to do with that aspect of it. But then when it came to making it snow in Halloween Town, that's what they needed some help with that. And so I wound up working with a very talented software engineer, a guy named Trin Wong. And Trin was writing the software for for me to be able to create the animated snow that was in that sequence. And at the time, this is like 92, 93, when the film came out in 94.
93, I think.
93. It was like late 93 it came out. So 92, 93, there really wasn't any kind of off-the-shelf particle system software like there is today. Now you can buy these animation packages and use them on your Mac. But there just wasn't anything like that back in the early 90s. And so Trin was actually writing the software that allowed us to create the snow in Halloween Town. So that was really my contribution to that film. In fact, I think they gave me a credit as snow animator. But I went up to San Francisco a couple times, and I met with Henry, and to find out what it was he wanted, and I got to see Skellington Studios up there, and it was just a lot of fun, and then 25 years later, to go and talk with all of these, all the different players. I went up to San Francisco and spent like a day at Henry's house, just hanging out and chatting with him and recording an interview with him. And it was just great to be able to catch up with some of these folks who are old friends and to talk about a film that we all love.
That's really cool. Another thing I noticed in the credits years ago is Pixar is listed.
Yeah.
And do you know much about like what Pixar?
You know what it was? It was Pixar imaging computers.
Oh, okay. So just the software or hardware.
Yeah. In fact, a lot of people don't realize it, but the CAP system, the early CAP system that was installed at Disney Animation, thanks to Roy E. Disney, by the way, who really championed that. That CAP system, the computer animation production system that allowed us to do digital ink and paint on those films, the original computers that ran that system were Pixar imaging computers, because Pixar originally was a hardware company that also did software, and they were creating animated commercials to show off their hardware and software. So that's how they kind of started out.
Gotcha.
And that's, by the way, before they do Toy Story.
I think of Pixar every time I have Listerine.
There you go. Exactly. The Listerine commercials. Yeah.
So Dave, you were at the studios pretty much right in the change of the way animation was made, really, from the hand-drawn into the computer. So you saw kind of that transition, right?
Oh, absolutely. I got to tell you, I spent 2 weeks in Santa Barbara, trying to remember when this was. This would have been on Oliver and Company, that far back, whatever year that was. I spent 2 years at Wavefront Technologies up in Santa Barbara being trained on Power Animator software. Now, Power Animator is the software package that became Maya. So it was a very early version of an animation package, and we had used that software on Oliver and Company to do some of the vehicles.
I remember that because it was they talked about it in the Disney Channel making of special.
Yeah.
They
I think about that every time I love Oliver and Company. It just hit me at the right time, and every time I see the cars, I go, "Oh, that's the part that they talked about using the computers for in the Disney Channel special."
Well, on the staircase too, right? From Perfect Isn't Easy.
What's that?
Didn't they do, or the staircase that Georgette goes down in Perfect Isn't Easy? Isn't that computer animated as well?
Probably. I'm pretty sure it is. My recollections from that are like Fagin's trike is like, shopping cart scooter thing, and Sykes's sort of like Lincoln Continental looking vehicle. And I wound up actually leaving partway through that film and going over to Europe. And I worked on Land Before Time in Ireland, and then went to London and did Who Framed Roger Rabbit, and then came back to Los Angeles, and they were just finishing off Oliver.
So you did 2 movies in the span of them doing just Oliver and Company.
Pretty much.
Can you do me a favor? Once you do the Nightmare Before Christmas book, could you do the Making of Who Framed Roger Rabbit book?
Yes, please. Yes.
You know, I got to tell you something. There's a friend of mine, Ross Anderson, who's written a book on Who Framed Roger Rabbit. And I think it's being published, or it has been published. It's called, actually it's been published. I have a copy of it here someplace in my office. It's Who Framed Roger Rabbit. I don't know, it's like pulling a rabbit out of a hat. Ross Anderson, and I think it was published through the Mississippi University Press. But it's hold on a second, because I just want to look this up, and I want to do justice to him by giving the actual title to it, because he spent years going around and interviewing almost everybody that was on the crew. And it's called Pulling a Rabbit Out of a Hat, The Making of Roger Rabbit. It's by Ross Anderson, and it's a paperback. You can get it on Amazon. And let me just see here. I think it is published by it's the University Press of Mississippi. And you know, I have to say it's kind of a shame it doesn't have better ratings, but I think that, you know, part of it is that people who bought this, you know, were expecting probably see a lot of artwork and pictures and stuff like that. And it's just text, you know, and part of the issue is there's a lot of different people that have hooks into Who Framed Roger Rabbit. And, you know, and by the way, I talked with Don Hahn, who was one of the producers of Who Framed Roger Rabbit. I talked with him about this, and, you know, it's like, I think part of it has to do with the fact that nobody in publishing, I should say, I shouldn't say this, but nobody in the publishing arena wants to make the effort to break down the barriers and just get a hold of somebody like a Steven Spielberg and say, we want to do this making of book and show a lot of the artwork. Because I think Spielberg probably would say, oh my gosh, go do that, you know?
Yeah.
But you know, there's just, I don't know. It's kind of frustrating sometimes with properties like that, because there's so much great artwork behind the scenes, and there's so many great stories behind the scenes that I think people would be super fascinated by.
Well, and I mean, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, there have been rumors about potential sequels and not being able to happen because of all that red tape. When I was a kid, because of the corridor of holiday doors in Nightmare Before Christmas, I remember really wanting to see Jack Skellington cross over into other holidays. And they have that little gag with the Easter Bunny.
Yeah.
But given how popular it's become, has there ever been, to your knowledge, any discussion about follow-up stories with these characters?
Yeah, I know that there had been from time to time discussions about doing a sequel to Nightmare Before Christmas, but I don't think Tim has any interest in doing that. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but you know, that's the impression I got from him in talking with him, is that this is a standalone movie. Not every movie needs to have a sequel, you know?
Correct.
I mean, you could sit there, you know, look, I mean, you know, some other studio, I think I'm laughing because I worked on Land Before Time, and Universal has done like 18 sequels to it. Right? I don't even know what they're up to. It's like Land Before Time 17. So.
That's a good question. Let me look that up right here.
Yeah, really.
They used to promote it on the escalators at Universal Studios. They're like, and you'd hear like, coming soon, Land Before the Time, 89. And you're like, what's going on?
I just remember it was the timing,
right?
I remember the timing being perfect because I have a younger sibling who's 7 years younger than me. And so Land Before Time was the first movie I saw in a theater. And then I remember he was the perfect age for like Land Before Time 2 coming straight to video. But yeah, it hasn't gone on forever.
But
the film has generated 13 direct-to-video sequels.
Okay. So with the original, there's 14 of them.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
I mean, look, I totally get that people like the property and whatnot, but I think there's some films that just you just don't do a sequel to it. You're not going to do a sequel to Casablanca, even though they tried, and and I think they did sort of. I forget the name of the film, but there was a follow-on to it that was not really a sequel, but they were trying to give it the same feeling, And there
was a TV series, wasn't there?
I don't know. I don't remember that.
I think on the anniversary Blu-ray, they have the pilot for a Casablanca TV series that Warner Brothers tried.
There's movies like that, Casablanca, The African Queen, pictures like that. You don't do sequels to. You don't do remakes to movies like that,
Mm-hmm.
And I think Nightmare Before Christmas is one of those. It's its own thing. It's a standalone. It's one movie that you can go back to. And how many times have we all watched Charlie Brown's Christmas Special? Or the Chuck Jones Grinch Who Stole Christmas, or Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer and Frosty the Snowman from Rankin and Bass. We watch those things over and over. I personally have probably watched each one of those things 35 or 40 times over the decades. And I think Nightmare is that film.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Nightmare definitely has become the Christmas movie for now at least 3 generations. I know that my nieces loved this movie when they got old enough, when it was on VHS. That was the always Christmas. Let's play Nightmare Before Christmas. And I never did the explanation of really it's a Halloween film, but we won't get into that debate. But it really has, like, there's no reason to do a sequel to it. It's just absolutely perfect. And I don't think that they could ever capture this lightning in a bottle again. I mean, with James and the Giant Peach, it was kind of like a, hey, here's another step in it, but that movie never took off like Nightmare did. And here we are 28 years later, watching it, talking about it. You're writing a book about it. So there's nothing that could ever change the love of the original for this one.
No, and something, I also think that the art form itself is really taken off because of Nightmare Before Christmas. And you've got an entire studio, Leica Studios up in Portland, that's making stop motion films. And they're taking it even to a further degree of artistry. And I have to say, like Kubo and the Two Strings, which I saw in the theaters, I loved the film, but it was so perfect. It almost felt like it was a CG movie. Like
Mm-hmm.
they were starting to, the technology has come in to be able to make these films so well that you're almost starting to lose the feeling of the hand of the artist, which you really feel in Nightmare Before Christmas.
Yeah, or like Paranorman had so many effects in it that it almost felt CG, like you were kind of tricked into what is actually hand done.
But like Henry Selick's Coraline is a gorgeous movie. I mean, it's just absolutely stunning. visually, it's a beautiful film. Box Trolls is another one from Leica. Beautiful movies. I mean, they're just gorgeous. And I have to say, a lot of the people that worked on Nightmare Before Christmas migrated up to Portland and have been working with Leica Studios on a lot of these movies.
That's like you said, this was kind of the start of the stop motion. I mean, yes, we had the old Rudolphs, but really, I mean, before this, I think Clash of the Titans was the last time that there'd been anything real stop motion used in my memory from a childhood watching different movies. And this came about, and then we are all blown away because we hadn't seen a full stop motion film like this other than the half-hour shorts. And then James and the Giant Peach, and then it started moving forward. But one of the most unique things about this film is it's not just stop motion. It has the practical effects of the flames and the smoke and everything, and the snow with the computer generation that really just changed the way we looked at films.
Yeah, no, I mean, I completely agree with you. You know, again, there was no real full-on feature. You know, Clash of the Titans was a live action animation movie, you know, but, you know, there was no standalone feature stop motion animated film. And, you know, the other interesting thing is when you look at the character designs, you know, look at Jack Skellington. You know, when you look at like Disney animation, I mean, the characters, the protagonists in these animated films, you know, a lot of them, the princesses are, you know, doe-eyed, you know, they got these beautiful eyes, and Tim designs a character with no eyes. No eyes. And how expressive is Jack Skellington in this film? You know, even though he doesn't have eyes, it's just, I mean, you can't get any more expressive. It's fantastic. But he went like the opposite end of the spectrum from the Disney house style.
One of the things that's so impressive too that, you know, I overlooked for a long time is the lighting in the film is really spectacular. And just to know that they had to do it frame by frame, keep it consistent, avoid any potential flicker. And then you have lights within vehicles, lights on Christmas trees. There's so many lights within the set itself, in addition to the lights behind the camera.
Yeah, I actually write a little bit about that in the book because they tapped into some of the engineers down in at the animation studio to solve an issue with like when a bulb burned out. They actually came up with a sort of a voltage regulator type of device that they used to help them up there to avoid having to do a complete retake if they lost a bulb.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I just want to just take a pause for a moment because right now in the film it's snowing.
Yeah. There you go.
And so I just want to show some appreciation to our guest for, I mean, actually amazingly, I mean, you can't, you don't, for the time it was made, it looks amazing. I mean, it looks great now. I mean, it's just, you don't even think about it.
And those are little doily shaped snowflakes.
Yeah, I was gonna say you can see the details.
Yeah.
Like,
So we had a series of little snowflakes that we mapped onto the particles.
That's really cool. And I think that's some, you know, a lot of times, you know, everyone grows up loving animation and animated movies, but the technical wizardry and attention to detail, I think, is lost on many people, including myself, until you really talk to folks that worked on it. You're like, oh yeah, well, you know, I mean, and you're not supposed to notice it, but when you do, it makes you appreciate all the hard work that goes into it.
Yeah, I mean, you're exactly right. When you do all this stuff right, people aren't really noticing it. But I have to give Henry Selick a lot of credit because when he went into this film, what he wanted to do was he wanted to treat it like it was a live action film. And Alex, you brought up the lighting. He wanted to have, you know, beautiful lighting. He wanted to have camera moves. You know, he really wanted this to feel like a motion picture, you know, and I think he certainly achieved it. And the team he pulled together, just phenomenal group of people, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I spoke to a tremendous number of people on, you know, from animators, you know, like Joran Klubin and Owen Klatt, to Trey Thomas, Anthony Scott, visual development people like Kelly Asbury and, you know, Jerome Ranft, Joe Ranft's brother. You know, Angie Glocka, another person I spoke to, Joel Fletcher. All these folks were just incredibly, you know, forthcoming with information. Also, just every time I talked to somebody, I'd say, "Oh, you know, do you have any photos or any keepsakes from when you made the movie?" And I mean, people just, the stuff they were sending was just phenomenal.
It's funny that you were.
Go ahead.
It's funny that you were listing off everybody because we just hit the credits and some of the names were popping up as we were going.
Oh, that's funny. You know, there was while they were making the movie, Ward Kimball, Frank Thomas, Ollie Johnson, and I believe it was Milt Kahl and their wives happened to be up in the Bay Area and came by Skellington Studios. And there's actually some video footage of that, of them walking around, touring the studio and talking with Henry Selick and all of that, which was kind of fun.
Wow. And was that studio on Treasure Island? Do you remember? Like, that's what I've heard, is that where Nightmare Before Christmas and James and the Giant Peach were made is a warehouse on Treasure Island.
Well, I'm not super familiar with the area up there, but the warehouse was it was an old garage that they were parking Jaguars in. That the local Jaguar dealership had the lease on or whatever, and they did some wrangling with them and got the facility. It's in San Francisco. It's in the city.
Okay.
So I don't know where Treasure Island is.
It's a connection point on the Bay Bridge. So it's just this tiny little island. It's got some military bases. At one point, they were going to build a theme park.
No, it wasn't on Treasure Island. I know that. It was
Okay.
It was sort of like in a pretty rough neighborhood of San Francisco, I have to say. In fact, the funniest thing was they had to do a retake on one of the shots. They had some trees with leaves on them. And I think the leaves were made out of paper or foam core or something. And while they were shooting, they didn't have air conditioning in the building. So they opened the garage door at one end of the building to let some air in.
Ooh.
And it happened to be kind of humid. And as they were shooting this one shot, you could actually see the set pieces starting to curl from the heat and humidity.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so Dave, your name just came by as Snow Animator. So
there you go.
Legacy,
my job's done. Thanks, guys.
Well, and they use the same space for James and the Giant Peach. They even gave a cameo for Jack Skellington. Do you know, did they go from one to the other that quick, or how big of a gap?
I think there was a reasonable leap into James and the Giant Peach. I think the intention was that they were going to continue to do some of these stop motion movies, but I don't think because Nightmare wasn't a knockout of the park box office hit initially. And then James and the Giant Peach, I think, was soft. I think after that they were like, yeah, okay, we're done.
Okay.
Yeah. So.
Well, thanks so much for joining us, Dave. You got any last thoughts?
No, I thoroughly enjoyed doing this with you guys. This was a lot of fun. It dragged up a lot of memories, and I think we talked about a lot of great stuff, you know. So,
well, thanks so much. His book is available for pre-order. Check the comments for the. I mean, you know, it's a Dave Bossert book, so you know it's gonna be great. I mean, between his Destino, I mean, his Oswald book and the
Roy Disney, Destino.
I love
just rattle them off.
Yeah,
the Oswald.
The Oswald book is amazing.
Book is one of
I'm
my
staring at it
books.
right now. It has a place of honor on our bookshelf.
Yeah, I can
all
see the
amazing.
Oswald
And-
books from here too.
and different. You know, some are a little deeper dives, and some are just a lot of fun and easy to get into. So
you know, and one of the things I like to do with these books is I really do work hard at wanting to deliver material that people have never seen before, you know, and I think that when you look at any of the books, the Destino book or Oswald, you know, there's even the Roy Disney book, there's photos and there's images in those books that people have never seen before. And that's, you know, one of the things I pride myself on. I think the Nightmare Before Christmas book is going to be just chock full of stuff that people have never seen before. You know, behind the scenes photos that I got from animators and you know, artists that were working on the project. And I think that to me is the fun part about this, because, you know, how many times have we all seen stuff out in the world where it's like, I've seen that image 42 times. Why do they keep using it? I want to get something different, you know, right?
Yep.
absolutely.
Yes.
Well, thanks again, Dave. We really appreciate the time. Jeremiah, Alex and I will be back on Thursday, where we're going to watch Moana as part of Shop Disney Story Time. So make waves. And Dave, thanks again. And we really look forward to hearing more about all of your books. I'm really excited about the Claude Coates.
My pleasure, guys. And you know, I'm going to keep in touch with you, and I'll get you a copy of the 3D Disney book, the 3D Disneyland book, once it gets back from the printer. So, you know, we could do something on that later in the year, hopefully.
Sounds great.
Yeah.
So I'm going to end the meeting, guys. So we'll see you next time.
Thanks, guys.
Alex.
Take care.
Thanks, Dave.
Bye, everybody. Bye-bye.